Solo Leveling Episode 1 to 4 had some changes that created a completely different atmosphere than that of the manhwa, and I'll be illustrating a few of these changes. These first few episodes adapted chapters 1 to 17 of the manhwa, but the anime didn't start adapting any of the manhwa until a few minutes in, first showing us 3 years ago on a faraway island with some medieval dressed warriors being attacked by ants. But wait, before that we had seen some naval battleships on the outskirts of the island, which already sets the plot somewhere in the modern day. The anime right away establishes the world is a crazy mix of creatures, warriors, action, magic, and military might without skipping a beat. This scene isn't from the beginning of Solo Leveling. It's from arguably one of the best arcs, which is about 90 chapters in. This is a very interesting way to start the story. This may be a hint that the studio intends to adapt this arc later, which I would be looking forward to. Or they were just flexing their animation skills, which I can't say is a bad thing and is an awesome way to start the story off. Now, back to the story at hand. It seems this all happened 10 years ago, when gates opened, causing a phenomena. Monsters would pour out, and humans with supernatural skills would appear. They are called hunters, in which case they are labeled S, which is the strongest, and then A to E, which is the weakest. But our story focuses on an E-rank hunter named Jinwoo. Before we get introduced to him, the anime lets us meet two other hunters, Kim Sang-shik and Park Byung-shik, both D-rank hunters. In the manhwa, we wouldn't get to see them until a couple pages in, as front and center would be our main protagonist, Sung, giving some light into why he's a hunter in the first place. He left high school with little or no prospects, as such this is the only job that he could do, but his powers are less than substantial since he's a E-rank hunter known as the weakest hunter of all mankind. Even in E-rank dungeons, he would get hurt. His power levels weren't much higher than that of a regular civilian. You'd think getting hurt so much would prevent him from being a hunter. In most cases, any of us would have given up, except that in his case, his mother is sick, which we would find out more about later down the line. One thing the anime didn't touch on is that the Hunters Association grants him medical aid and life insurance. The medical aid would go directly to his mother's medical bills, which are astronomically high, and only somewhere like the Hunters Association could help with that. Sung feels that he must stay on as a hunter. Unlike in the manhwa, the anime didn't have nearly as many people greet him or be so familiar with him when he arrives. As he gets to the dungeon site, he is greeted by everyone and then he asks for coffee from the local vendor. But they didn't have any as they ran out earlier. This would be where Joo-hee would come along, in which case she badgered him about his new wounds and him getting hurt again, which is a regular occurrence for him. Before long, Sung Chi-yul, whom I'll refer to as Mr. Sung, would volunteer to lead the team in this. With little more than a snide comment from Mr. Kim, Jinwoo and the rest would enter the dungeon. A little anime exclusive here is the inclusion of Jinwoo having a knife. Very early on, due to his rank and making little money when he went on raids, he wouldn't be able to afford a weapon. He had initially tried this before, but it broke and ended up costing him more of the little that he was already making, in which case he would enter dungeons empty-handed. This is wild to think about, being that even guns and regular knives weren't able to damage some of the weakest of goblins, and Jinwoo, the weakest hunter of all mankind, would be out here throwing hands. This same recklessness will come into play a little later, but for now, we can move on. Some people might be a bit confused when it comes on to gates and how it operates. When gates first opened and hunters were discovered, it was nothing but chaos. The unregulated hunters could easily turn a country on its head and very quickly became the source of its military might. So the Hunters Association was formed. They would not only regulate raids, but assign them to hunters that had the power to clear them with little or no risk. But over time, guilds, which are independent of the association, would be formed. These guilds would then camp out where newly awakened hunters would get tested to poach them, or hunters could apply directly. Each guild, based on their own might, would then have the ability to do higher rated dungeons. And with those higher rated dungeons, there would be much more loot to go around. Millions and billions in fact, with some of the best armor. As thus, many would want to join these guilds for some reason or another. But there are others who find it easier not to join a guild, or others like Jinwoo, due to their strength, not being able to. Once a dungeon opens up, the Hunters Association would send out their team to rate the strength of the dungeon based off the mana waves it emits, and then assigns a team or guild to clear it depending on said strength. Since lower dungeons don't have much riches, guilds tend to avoid them and thus less powerful hunters, not a part of the guild, but a part of the association, would be given a chance to sign up for these raids. This is the same reason why many at the construction site were really happy to see Jinwoo. If the Hunters Association had assigned him to this dungeon, it pretty much means that it's super low effort with little or no risk. And as you may have noticed, many of these hunters would be acquainted with each other, since for most of these lower rated dungeons, much of the same parties would be assigned to clear them. I've also seen many people asking why some of these hunters wear regular gear and others don't. That pretty much falls into the same category that we just highlighted a moment ago. With the appearance of dungeons, commodities such as essence stones and rare items would be found. The government was very interested in these valuable assets, as said by Chairman Go. The better the stone, the better the equipment. Higher rated dungeons would yield more danger, but better loot and better gear. As a low rank hunter, B or E, not assigned to a guild, it would be very hard to earn these higher essence stones and equipment because of the dungeons themselves not being that much profitable. So you would see most of these hunters sporting regular gear and a weapon that's good enough to kill the monsters inside. In the manhwa, when we cut back, we see the vendors worried about Jinwoo. One of them feeling really bad that he didn't have at least some coffee to give him. The anime would take the liberty to introduce us to Chairman Go, who isn't seen in the manhwa till much later in the chapters, as he explains more about essence stones and their values. But inside the dungeon is a heated battle with Sung already being healed by Joo-hee after seemingly being injured. It's at this point near the end of the raid where she asks him why he continues being a hunter, knowing full well that he'll be hurt like this over and over, even in the weakest dungeons. In which case he would say he's just too embarrassed to reveal that. Meanwhile, the others would finish off the last of the magical beasts when they find a new entrance. This is where the manhwa would take the liberty of letting us know a bit more about essence stones. It's to note here as well that they hadn't found the boss as yet, so this is where Mr. Sung would assume that the boss is down in the new tunnel, in which case they would need to report it to the guild. However, the guild will just take all the spoils, so they take it to a vote. Now, due to Jinwoo only being able to collect a simple E rank essence stone, and also we find out that his mother is hospitalized, he gets the breaking vote and votes to go in. In the anime, things play out a little bit different. Jinwoo would have already gotten an essence stone before a goblin would notice him. He engages the creature only to get his knife broken and badly hurt, so Joo-hee would need to heal him quickly and Sing would take care of the goblin. Then we will get the rest of the chairman's speech about various items such as stones in dungeons and such. But when we get back to the dungeon at hand, Joo-hee is hanging back mostly for Jinwoo's support while the others take care of what they think to be the dungeon boss. This is when they would find the double dungeon and take a vote to see if they should continue or not, and then Jinwoo would decide to go since he didn't get much. Also, a running theme of this episode that won't be a shock or be limited anytime soon is the anime exclusive introduction of other characters of the world. And during this cutscene, we get to see a few prominent characters for later episodes. These would include Yoo Jin-ho, Cha Ha-in, and Ha Sung-yi. We are introduced to the hunter evaluation test and a presentation that all new hunters would need to go through. Interlaced with the rest of this episode, we will see more of Chairman Go, but I'll comment a bit more on these cutscenes later in the video, so stick around for that. In the dungeon, Joo-hee would comment on how Sung should take her out for dinner for being such a stubborn fool for doing these dangerous dungeons. In the manhwa, it would seem a bit more animated and cartoonish in comedic responses, but overall, the anime keeps basically the same tone right up to the gate. A slight continuity error is spotted here. Earlier in the anime, they claim to have killed the boss, but now they say they think that this is the boss's room, which of course makes no sense. But here is where the team would start to have a little bit of doubt in entering the room, as anyone's first instinct is to not enter this place. Mr. Sung would use a bit of manipulation, saying that if they want to turn back, they can. He would be fine going it alone. Since he is a C-rank hunter who's had the most experience here, the only reason he isn't in a guild is simply due to his age. The group would put their trust in him, though the real concern is about the time they've already spent in the dungeon. Even as a weak dungeon, there is a great risk of getting trapped in here forever, since no other hunter has ever escaped in the past after a gate closes. If they had indeed killed the boss, it would mean that they would have approximately 1 hour to get out, but they've been walking for about 40 minutes. And sure, they could run back if they needed to, but they wouldn't have time to collect the loot that was dropped. Anyways, they would venture inside. where they would come to see what we know as the killer statues. This area is much larger in the manhwa and much more old and untouched, as these statues are covered with moss. They would come to the rules of the dungeon, in which case the manhwa would describe these as runic text, but in the anime it's more along the lines of ancient scriptures, which makes it seem much closer to modern religion. This is a language only native to dungeons, and regular humans can't read it, but for awakened beings like hunters who possess magic, they have no issues reading such texts, in which case Mr. Sung translates it. It's at this point that Joo-hee would notice the statue, and in the manhwa, Jinwoo would start to feel an ominous energy, but the dungeon doors would slam shut. This dude would get fed up and try to get out, only to get slashed by one of the statues in full view of everyone, killing him instantly. At this point, everyone realized that the anime isn't messing around with showing the full gore of this shot. Jinwoo would break down everything for us, being that this is supposed to be a D rank dungeon and that guy who died is supposed to be a D rank, meaning that these statues go far beyond D rank if they can kill him so fast that he couldn't respond. But more than that, it simply means that when Joo-hee said that she saw a statue looking at them, she was right. When he looks around, its eyes glow and focus on him. A flashback would ensue showing how he survived as an E rank hunter for this long, and how he's faced death more times than anyone could count. He got slashed in the back, then got lost in a dungeon where he almost starved to death. And here is another small change that the manhwa had made. Jinwoo, due to him not being able to afford weapons, had to fight barehanded, whereas in the anime all he could afford was a low-level knife. In the anime we would get an exclusive scene of him having to use his head in dungeons, in that he would need to plan his attack and use opportunities provided to him to even kill a low-level goblin. Before the scene snaps back to the dungeon, where the statue would immediately use its laser eyes to vaporize a hunter. This far exceeds what any of them had initially expected, and it's about to get worse. This is where the episode would end, and it would also be a few pages into chapter 4 of the manhwa. Episode 1 of Solo Leveling did a really amazing job of introducing us to the world, but still leaving enough intrigue for us, the viewer, to really start thinking about the wider world and what it means overall. One issue which I had with the manhwa when I initially read it is that it seemingly was one-sided and focused heavily on Jinwoo and hardly ever established other characters unless they were in close proximity of him. However, the anime didn't seem to take that route, with the first couple scenes already establishing that the world had strong hunters and they aren't afraid to put their lives on the line, while at the same time showing off its flashy animation, as well as interlacing other characters that we see in later chapters much earlier for us to familiarize ourselves with them and wanting to see how they utilize their own strengths and powers as compared to everyone else. We get more of this in episode 2 and 3, however, since I already highlighted it here, I won't be highlighting it moving forward. So I'll talk more on Jinwoo's character after we analyze episode 2, as in that episode we get a lot more context. Let's just jump in and see the differences. Episode 2 jumps right back into the thick of things with Mr. Sung telling everyone not to move as the statue will attack again. He would then make his way over to Jinwoo, where he would get medical aid for his hand and also assess the situation, where they both review the commandments and come to the conclusion that the statue must be the god that the stone tablet was talking about. This is where we would get some narration and a little bit of world building. In the manhwa, it seems to have used Jinwoo's voice, but in the anime it used this disembodied narrator, who to me sounds a lot like Chairman Go, but I could be wrong on that. Let me know in the comments below, but for now we can move on. I really like the addition of Jinwoo's sister here. Her friend's name isn't revealed in the anime, but I already said it if you were listening earlier in the video. Back in the dungeon, Mr. Sung further assesses the situation before this guy decides that it's time to run out of this place. But before that, one thing the anime omitted is the fact that they brought 3 healers, one of which was killed by the blast just now, and the other 2, including Joo-hee, are now in a state of shock, and no one can blame them seeing the hopeless situation that they're in. Back to this running guy, poor dude would never make it to the light of day as the statue vaporized him instantly, leaving only his Crocs behind. Jinwoo would now realize that these statues aren't murdering them, and he questions that, seeing that they can easily do so, as thus they must follow a set of rules, and this is where the commandments come into play. He would then test it by first standing up to see if the statue's eyes would light up, and yes it did. Then he falls back to the ground and he sees that the statue's eyes goes dark. He would then realize that he would only get attacked if you're at a certain height, and then beckons everyone in the room to bow their head, which would lead us to the iconic smile. Unbeknownst to them, this would be the acceptance of stage 1, and when they all would raise their heads, stage 2 will begin, where the statue starts marching at them, ready to crush each and every one under its massive feet. A small change here that the anime did is with this guy, where he would say that he would be studying ethnology, whereas in the manhwa he would just be a church boy, which I found hilarious. He gets crushed, followed by this girl. One thing that I have to mention is this god in the manhwa seems to be reveling in the sheer carnage, while in the anime it may have just been doing what it was designed to do, if that makes any sense. They would try to flee, but Park would then get bisected. In the manhwa, it seems that he was trying to put himself back together before his nerves would fail and he would plop down to the ground like beef or something. One thing that I touched on briefly in this video is the incredibly expressive faces that they would have in the manhwa as compared to the anime. This isn't just for comedic scenes, it's for scenes like this as well, and it would continue for the rest of the manhwa. While they're running, something I noticed in the background, it looks as if 4 others got axed, but in the anime it would only be this guy that would get split, and I think that might have been the other healer. Jinwoo figures out that they need to run to the statues which have instruments on them to stay safe, in which case he would need to leave Joo-hee by herself as this one wouldn't play for both of them. One thing the manhwa did so well is when Jinwoo was running, he inadvertently slid near a statue in which it proceeded to attack him. As we all know, he's had past experiences with life and death situations. In this moment, facing a statue that can instantly kill him bearing down, he literally felt like he was going to lose this tug of war between life and death. In the manhwa, we see him literally hold on to life itself with the string nearly snapping. He barely makes it to one of the instrumental statues, and he would be saved before realizing that he lost one of his legs in that scuffle. It is to note that in the scuffle between him and the statue, it seems to have caused more damage in the manhwa than in the anime. When the statue walks back, it raises the altar, but in the anime, it seems to have taken a seat and then the altar was raised, seeming to give the last 6 hunters a little bit of breathing room. Mr. Kim would accuse Mr. Song of being a terrible leader, but instead of running away, he humbly accepts his role, when in fact Jinwoo had the right sentiment that they all voted to come here. In the manhwa, Mr. Kim actually pulls his sword out of a pocket dimension, which is indicative of a game, and you can already see where the issues would lie with this, so the anime removed it and he would just take the sword from his pants. Just a little anticlimactic. Jinwoo would assume that this altar is for sacrifice based off the last commandment, for them to prove their faith. So Mr. Song takes charge once more and walks over to the altar, but he doesn't die. Instead, a flame is lit, and the other hunters, including Jinwoo, would join him, only to see red flames lit for each of them and then blue flames as a timer. At this stage, the doors would open once more. Jinwoo would figure out that they would need to wait until the blue flames go out while watching each of the statues to make it out of this dungeon alive, but one girl couldn't take it anymore and she runs away. A flame goes out and the doors slowly close off. Things soon fall apart when others, including Mr. Kim, joining the ones who fled, and yeah, Mr. Kim dropped his sword, which is very important for the upcoming episode. This would leave just Jinwoo, Joo-hee, and Mr. Song, all now in this hopeless situation. Mr. Song would tell Joo-hee to take Jinwoo and get out of here. However, her legs would freeze up and they would give out. Now this is due to mana lock. You see, the whole time where they were in the dungeon, Joo-hee had been healing Jinwoo. This would have taken a toll on her body. In the previous scene, it even showed her coughing up blood. In this world, when you run low on mana, it has negative physical effects on your body, in which case she would lose strength in her legs. The anime made it seem as if she was just too scared to move, when that just wasn't it at all. In which case, Jinwoo would tell Mr. Song to take her and go before giving her his essence stone, but then Mr. Song would need to strike her in the back of the neck for her to comply. This is where he would take his leave and Jinwoo would grab Mr. Kim's blade and say that hey, he's taking down one of them with him. That's it. I really love the manhwa's depiction here more than in the anime. As the manhwa, it seemed a little bit more bloody and a hopeless situation. The anime did make up for this though with marvelous and spectacular voice acting, and also the scene was drawn out a little bit more. In the manhwa, he would get stabbed in the chest and then it would rip off his shoulder where he would fall to the altar and then almost be killed before he gets the player notification. While in the anime, the first strike would essentially miss him, followed by others that would completely take off his hand and then impale him on the shoulder, where things would be more in line to where the manhwa is right now. Then the episode would end. The manhwa actually had a little bit more to continue here, showing us that time kinda slowed down or it stopped altogether, allowing him to think about the notifications overall. It could have been a case where the adrenaline pumping through his veins would make things seem like it's moving much slower than normal. But the major difference here is that in the manhwa, instead of him just reading out the prompts, he would hear a voice in his head read out the player notification. The anime would have him accept the notifications, when in the manhwa, he would accept it simply because it would prevent him from dying. Funny enough, we get an image here that makes it seem as if the statue was crying, lamenting over the fact that it couldn't finish them off. Many were saying that these 2 episodes should have been composed into one, and I fully agree, but at the same time, I can get why they didn't. It could be that they wanted to show more in this season, or the broadcasting spot that they had only allotted for 30 minutes. Overall, it's been a solid start to the series, and the anime didn't stray away from the gore, but at the same time it didn't glorify it. While the manhwa gave us a little more space for a narrative to be spun around the world with a little bit more context. At the end of the episode, the prospects of a system or player would now have us wondering what does that mean for Jinwoo as a hunter. But due to the sheer speed of what happened, most of us, especially the anime onlys, wouldn't really understand and would think that it would be a part of the outro song. But we would get some more explanations for this in episode 3. This brings us to a very important question. If everyone had remained in the dungeon, would it be a case where they would all turn into players? Maybe, who knows? One thing that I didn't mention during our talks for the first 2 episodes was the familiarity between Jinwoo, Mr. Sung, and Joo-hee. Throughout the rest of the episodes upcoming, we could see that Mr. Sung actually played some sort of mentor-father role to Jinwoo, providing him with some guidance through his journey as a hunter. And it's these kind words that stuck with him throughout his trials and pushed him to never give up no matter what. The anime doesn't expound a lot on their relationships, especially the one between Joo-hee and Jinwoo either. I had mentioned something earlier in the breakdown about how the association assigns dungeons, which can also play a deeper role in their 3-way relationship. It's not just Jinwoo that knows Joo-hee, it's also Mr. Sung that's very familiar with her. That's why he was able to give Jinwoo some insight into how Joo-hee was feeling in the moment that danger erupted. You see, they've all been on numerous raids together, and over time, Joo-hee developed more and more feelings for Jinwoo. In most of their previous raids, Joo-hee would be focused on healing Jinwoo, but throughout all of this, he would never trauma dump on her. He would never tell her the reason for him being a hunter, but she would never stop asking, even in the double dungeon as we saw. Jinwoo is a very kind character to those he's around, and even though he's weak, he never wants to burden anyone with his presence and always wants to pull his own weight. He's very heroic in wanting to help people, but knows his kindness will someday lead to him getting killed. So he finds comfort in finding others who really care for him, all the while keeping his personal business personal. Even while risking his life, he's always thinking about his family. And sure, he doesn't want to die, but at the same time, he doesn't have much of a choice other than risking his life. But we can talk more about his character as we move forward. So let's jump into the events of episode 3. Episode 3 would begin pretty much the same place as chapter 11, with Jinwoo waking up in the hospital thinking that it was all a dream now that his limbs are attached. In the anime, he would check for his hand and leg, which makes sense, while in the manhwa, he would check his chest and leg, which also makes sense. 2 people would enter the room, and right away there's a major deviation from the manhwa. This guy would be replaced with Kangtae Shiik, and pardon me for butchering that name. He would be a prominent character in an upcoming dungeon. Without going much into spoilers, it would make much sense what's to come with Kang, in that he would meet Jinwoo here, which solidifies Jinwoo's strength in his mind. Accompanying him is Woo Jin-chul, currently the head of the Hunters Association surveillance team, who investigates anomalies or any strange events to take place in dungeons, including managing new awakened beings. It is to note that everyone who ran out of the dungeon to leave Jinwoo there to die had survived. However, Joo-hee is traumatized, and due to Mr. Sung's loss of limbs, he may retire from being a hunter. It is stated that once you are awakened, you remain the same level. However, some have a double awakening. And some of these double awakened beings, will see them later, but in Jinwoo's case, it would be something a lot different. Jinwoo is excited about his double awakening. This could get him much stronger in an instant, whereby even a weak hunter like him being at E could shoot right up to S rank, but when they measure his mana, it only comes up as a measly 10. Most hunters his rank are at least 70 to 100, making him barely stronger than a regular human at this point. Something interesting to note is that when Jinwoo had initially awakened, his mana level was 12, so it seems that he's gotten weaker, or it's a part of the system that reset him to be a default regular person. And that's just my speculation. Interestingly enough, when they find him in the manhwa, he is on the altar and his body parts had recovered, but you can see that his clothes are still affected. The anime kept this scene pretty much the same except the removal of the altar, which makes it much harder to believe the survivors on what had happened in the dungeon. Oddly, why has no one mentioned his removed limb, mainly his leg? And seeing that it's regrown, wouldn't it throw up some red flags? Even if the survivors never see him again, they must have mentioned this to Woo. It's really interesting that the anime removed Woo's inner dialogue of calling Jinwoo trash, seeing his mana reading results. But he would end up leaving and reporting to Chairman Go that it's nothing, and now they'll just have to log it as an anomaly. I mean, what else can they do? However, Jinwoo hid something from them: his ability to see this new window. In the manhwa, he would stand up on his bed and try to touch the window, but nothing ever happens. So his sister barges in and helps him. In the anime, he didn't stand up, and the window wasn't blocking his sister's face, but nonetheless, it seems that she's a gamer in this family, which is a really nice twist to a show that doesn't have much twists yet. Something to note is that these panels aren't voice activated, instead they're intention activated, and over time you'll see what I mean. But I've spent a whole lot of time here, so it's time to speed up a little bit and move on. His sister leaves and he sees that he has to do the One Punch Man training, but he's too tired, so he goes to sleep. Another cutscene here engages us with Cha Ha-in, having to lead her own raid, so she doesn't really want to. What's really interesting here is that they found time to include a dungeon that wouldn't be taken care of for a while until Jinwoo completes his own first dungeon. In the manhwa, it wasn't even mentioned until Jinwoo came out of his first instance. The anime does expound a little bit more on this world as well. Instead of regular forecasts, we have dungeon or gate forecasts. It seems that life has adapted well in these last 10 years since this anomaly has appeared. It also shows a little bit of Ju-hee. In the manhwa, she wasn't really shown until Jinwoo came out of his first dungeon, but it seemed that she paid a visit to him in the hospital, but she felt some kind of guilt, so she didn't bother saying hi, seeing that he was already up and running at the time. And I find it interesting that Jinwoo wouldn't even check on her either, if even a phone call, seeing that they were so close. It's almost like the author didn't want to take time to deal with the trivial pursuit of feelings or something. Well, that will become more apparent as the story goes on if the anime doesn't fix it. Anyways, we get back to Jinwoo to see that he's fast asleep and not doing his daily quest will cause a penalty. He's teleported to a desert where he must survive against these centipedes for 4 hours, and I've seen many people complain about this, saying that the time frame is way too long and that these things would have been much faster than him. And yes, maybe he can survive for like 20 minutes, but 4 hours is way too long. At any rate, the anime would include this scene of where the nurses are looking for him and then he pops back into his room with sand from the desert where he passes out and they would find him. I have a lot to say when it comes on to this new system that he's introduced to, but I'll leave that to the end of the video. For now, we can move on. The manhwa would switch over to him just running, but as you know, the anime would include a few scenes we talked about earlier. Once he completes his daily quests, he gets about 3 ability points, which he can then put somewhere into 5 stats, which is strength, vitality, agility, intellect, and perception, in which case the manhwa would spell them out more implicitly, especially in the case of his passive skills, which have their own arbitrary level up requirements. He has willpower and dash at level 1, which will come into play a little bit later, so keep an eye on those. He also gets 1 full recovery and 1 random present. One thing you can do to keep a track of his rank in this world is his MP points, which is currently 10. Since regular E rank hunters have about 70 to 100, this would mean that once he exceeds this, he would naturally go up a rank. And again, something we'll discuss later. The anime would also interject a hilarious scene of him talking to himself. In the manhwa, it would just jump to him heading out of the hospital and then to the dungeon instance, but the anime would cut to his past. We really didn't get much explanation of his mother's condition for a while in the manhwa, so this is very welcome to see here. Sometime after the gates were opened, she suffered from strong mana surges, which she couldn't handle, and thus she fell into the eternal sleep, basically a coma. It would also show his powers awakening to further characterize his motivations for being a hunter and getting stronger, and then him getting a key for the dungeon instance before he would head off to it. But as a beginner, you know that he would pump most of his extra points into strength, which is understandable. Jumping over to the dungeon instance when he enters, his gear is slightly changed in the anime. He has a small knife, much like what he had in the double dungeon, but also his clothes are slightly different. He's wearing an orange short blue hoodie, pants, knapsack, and shoes, while in the manhwa he had no knife and he's wearing darker clothes, black pants, gray and black hoodie, and his shoes. While he was more reluctant in the manhwa, he seems a little less so in the anime, as he is confident in his ability to just run and escape. He would enter the dungeon and then find out that he can't escape until he clears the dungeon or uses a teleportation stone, as this gate is much more similar to a red gate, which we haven't seen in the anime as yet, and I'm not going to spoil that. The manhwa would end chapter 12 here, but the anime would continue with him taking on some goblins where he would kill one and then level up, and then he would continue until they're all dead. Now, him leveling up increases all his stats by 1. In the manhwa, he would be walking for a while until he smells something, only to be attacked by a wolf. But in the anime, the wolf would come out of nowhere and smash his little knife, and now he's unarmed, much like the manhwa. But unlike the manhwa, the wolf would cut him across the face, and then they would stare each other down, which is where the episode would end. Much of what I wanted to discuss doesn't really hold true until we take a look at episode 4, which is our final of the pair, so I'll reserve my thoughts until then. We pick up where the last episode left, with Jinwoo facing off with a steel-fanged lichen. He would discover that he's much more nimble and stronger than he thought, and he is just a little bit faster than the lichen, even going fist-to-face with a dog. Sorry, I mean wolf. He would soon discover that he needs a weapon to land the decisive blow. In the anime, when the lichen bites at his heels, he would dodge, but in the manhwa he would get injured. Luckily, he calls for his inventory and drags out a sword, slicing the lichen's face and killing it instantly. This would be Mr. Kim's blade that he dropped in the dungeon. It seems that when Jinwoo had awakened as a player, since the sword was with him, it entered into his inventory. It is to note that Jinwoo said that the cost is about $3 million for the sword, and the US dollar equivalent to this is $3,000, as the conversion conversion rate may fluctuate, but it's usually 1,000 to 1. I've seen others get a value closer to 2,000, which I can't say is wrong, as apparently the novels may say something a little different. Either way, it'll be much more than Jinwoo could afford. At any rate, more lichens would show up and he would obliterate them until a few ran away. At this stage, he would check his level, and we confirmed what we said earlier about his points. He discovers that the lichens would drop items instead of essence stones, and he could sell them in his shop, though not for much. More lichens would show up where he would take them on with no running. At the end of this all, he would have 34 wolf fangs, a cloak, and a teleportation stone. This is where the manhwa would expound on that time Jinwoo bought a weapon, but we already talked about that earlier in the video. The episode would follow pretty much the same formula as the others, interlacing other scenes. This time we see that the dungeon is close to breaking, and then Joo-hee would get a call where the dungeon would finally break. Meanwhile, Jinwoo would still be on his dungeon expedition, discovering new things, monsters, and what the colors of their names mean. White means that they're weaker than him, orange that they are slightly stronger or on the same level, red means that they're above his level. And now that he's up to level 15, he can sense where the boss is at due to his increased stats. In the manhwa, he wouldn't hesitate to head down to the boss, but in the anime he would have second thoughts, but he would still head down nonetheless. When he enters the boss's lair, it's a little bit more decrepit in the manhwa. The boss would attack him so fast that he wouldn't have time to react and his blade gets broken. To be honest, does Kasaka seem a little bit more menacing in the anime, and is it just me or is he bigger too? Definitely. Now many of you may have realized that his name is Orange here, which is slightly stronger than Jinwoo. And I absolutely love the fact that for most of this fight, the snake was 2D, not some half-assed 3D bullshit. And I'm not saying that 3D can't be done right, I'm just saying I've seen too many scenes where 3D has just been done completely wrong. Jinwoo would take on the snake in all its glory, and this thing is definitely bigger in the anime for sure. In the manhwa, it would seem that he would be slapped around a little bit more harder than in the anime, but overall he does a pretty good job of keeping up and sometimes dodging some of the snake's attacks. The animators did bless our eyes and gave us a scene of Kasaka throwing a train at him, showing just the sheer power of the boss, and I am loving it. We get another iconic image drawn beautifully here before Jinwoo would grab the snake by the neck and squeeze the ever-loving Christ out of it. One of his driving factors is also the double dungeon, as nothing is as terrifying as an insta-kill boss, so this thing isn't even close to on that level. Jinwoo would squeeze Kasaka, breaking the steel scales and killing it instantly. The manhwa would have us cut back to in the hospital where some doctors and nurses are wondering how hunters do it and saying that they can also become millionaires even at low rank dungeons. But then we would cut back to Jinwoo, who levels up a further 3 times from this fight. Now we get 2 prominent items: his dagger, which is Kasaka's venom fang, which deals bleed and paralysis, and then a venom gland. In the anime, it would decrease his strength by 35%, but in the manhwa, it would just be 35, in which case the dungeon vanishes, so he heads out. Just to note, Jinwoo is now level 18 here with a 350 MP, meaning that he's far beyond E rank. Many speculate that at this stage he's likely C or high C rank, or even low A rank in strength. I think he's more in the high D, low C rank here. He exits the dungeon and now comes face to face with a soldier that lets him know that there's been a dungeon break and leads him to the scene. This is where he would see Joo-hee on site, trying to do her best, but she's still traumatized. Instead of getting into the fight, he decides to throw the broken blade, bringing it down so the other hunters can take it out. And then he would take off himself, but Joo-hee would notice him, or his aura or something along that lines. When he thinks, hey, I think I've gotten a little bit stronger, this is where the episode would end. So far, solo leveling has made huge waves in the anime world, being aired at a time where there are mostly new anime on the horizon and nothing like Jujutsu Kaisen, Bleach, or even Demon Slayer. This allows more eyes to be on it. I previously read the solo leveling manhwa back in 2019 and I really enjoyed it, though I had my own gripes about the story. The anime seems to be a faithful adaptation while at the same time trying to correct some of the aspects that the manhwa didn't get right. One of which being the overall majority of the story is either told from Jinwoo's perspective or telling his experience while other characters suffer in his shadow. In the manhwa, other characters are almost non-existent unless it's to further Jinwoo's cause or die off screen or on screen to further the plot. To illustrate this point more, let's take a look at some of the greatest anime that has ever lived. Attack on Titan, Naruto, One Piece, and even Bleach. They have some of the most fantastic supporting characters and villains of all time that shape our MC, and without these characters, much of the story will be non-existent. If we look at solo leveling, take out all of its lesser or side characters, and it doesn't really affect the story all too much. Jinwoo still can level up in his dungeons and face off with any other atrocities that may rear their ugly head. episodes. The anime has taken a little of its runtime to introduce and characterize some of the others in the story, granting Solo Leveling the ability to grow in its own right and become a more flushed out epic tale. However, it's always to be cautious not to deviate too much from the main story, but to use these characters not as fillers but as their own persons. For now though, Solo Leveling gets a passing grade from me. Jinwoo, within the first 4 episodes before his metaphorical and quite literal rizz up, embodies unwavering determination, resilience, resourcefulness, and relentless growth as he transforms from a weak hunter into a formidable force driven by his quest for strength and the protection of his loved ones. We can also break down each of these traits into their own separate categories, starting with his determination. Despite facing numerous challenges and dangers, Sung Jinwoo remains resolute in his pursuit of strength and power even as an E-rank hunter. Before he was reawakened, he faced numerous challenges, more so in the manhwa than in the anime, as thus he had to be smart about which prey he takes out and how he goes about traversing dungeons. He's mostly been unarmed, and this shows incredible courage in the face of insurmountable odds. In his life, Sung Jinwoo demonstrates remarkable resilience in the face of adversity. He's endured grueling training, life-threatening battles, and setbacks, but he still managed to bounce back, and now he has a chance to get even stronger, though he questions many of the systems that allow him to. He takes on the challenge, showing that it's not only a will to protect his family that drives him, but something deep down inside pushing him to be a better version of himself, and due to this, he has to be resourceful. Sung Jinwoo is also adept at adapting to different circumstances and situations and utilizing his surroundings to his advantage. He employs clever strategies and tactics to overcome powerful opponents and emerge victorious in battle. But Sung Jinwoo isn't the only prominent character in the series that I wanted to look at. There's also the system which drives him and rewards his feats, so let's take a closer look at that. The player system in Solo Leveling is very easy to understand, but at the same time very easy to manipulate, as you'll see more and more as the episodes go along. The system was designed to get him as strong as possible in as short a period as possible, and thus giving him a huge advantage and imbalance in his rewards. For instance, for completing his daily quests, he is allowed to get 3 points where he can put to any of his stats, plus when he levels up he gets 1 point for each of his stats on top of that. Now he also gets 1 random item which is not limited to an instance dungeon based on his level or the rarity of the item. And finally, he gets a full recovery, which is insane to say. This simply means that no matter which level he is, he can be overpowered in that category. Like for instance, as an E rank hunter, he could still have the strength comparable to that of D rank or low C rank. This goes the same for any other ranking he falls into, such as A rank having S rank abilities based on just his daily quest completion rate, meaning that the system is already highly in his favor. For the story to be balanced, there must come a time when he doesn't have these points or these daily quests anymore that can give him these rewards, but we don't know if such a thing exists. And if that's the case, is there a point when he gets a certain value where he won't be able to increase anymore? And please note that I'm talking from the point of the anime up to episode 4 and chapter 17. But as a manhwa reader, I know that much of these questions have already been answered. And we do also know that he gets rewards for killing people. But that's a video for another day. That's pretty much all I want to discuss when it comes on to the system without spoiling the story. By no means is Solo Leveling a perfect power fantasy. In fact, I think that's why many would love it. The story isn't convoluted like many others, and the power system isn't hard to understand, as thus a lot of people can take up the manhwa or the anime and just enjoy some turn off your brain fun. Of course, this may not be so when we're just being introduced to the world for the first time, so we tend to, go world exploring and such. Another aspect of Solo Leveling that we can fall in love with is the art style. The time it takes to create such beautiful works of art and the artist's knowledge of the human body and how it moves in terms of action and suspense are simply amazing. I could sit and stare at these panels forever. The anime is currently doing a fantastic job so far of bringing these to life on the big screen, with vibrant colors and amazing action contrasted by good character development and also an intriguing plot. Overall, the anime is doing great sticking to the source material, and I hope to see much more to come. And I also hope that the anime sticks to what it's been doing so far, with introducing us to other characters that may not have been so prominent in the manhwa. We want them to have a little bit more voice in the story, because the story isn't just about Jinwoo, it's about the entire world as well. So let's see what's to come within this Solo Leveling game, and I'll be watching throughout. I know this has been a longer video than normal, and I wasn't planning to do a video on Solo Leveling, but I've been enjoying it so much I just had to. Show your support on this small channel by hitting that like button and start sharing this video with a friend. If you haven't subscribed as yet, you know what to do. Peace out, stay safe out there, V Nation. Bye.